Why had her fingers stopped on those 5 names? The memorial wall was cold against her skin, rough, weather-worn, and unflinching, just like the memories it held. Haley Brooks traced each letter with quiet precision, the way she used to trace contour lines on maps 15 years ago. Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, Thompson, Kowalski, her team, her family, her failure. She hadn't come here to talk. She hadn't come to meet anyone. She hadn't even planned to stay long. Just a quiet visit before the weekend crowd arrived, maybe sit in the sun, maybe let the sound of rifles in the distance remind her of a younger version of herself. The Oceanside Range opened its gates to civilians every third Saturday, and she had told herself she was just curious, just another face in a crowd of families and military enthusiasts watching soldiers put on a show. But standing there, her wrist pressed against polished granite, she realized she was stalling. She wasn't ready to turn around yet. Behind her, voices floated on the dry California wind, children laughing, the sharp metallic clack of rifles being checked by instructors, the low rumble of a staff sergeant calling range safety rules. Normal sounds, safe sounds. For everyone but her. When she finally stepped away from the wall, it was slow, deliberate. She crossed the gravel lot, her boots crunching softly, until she reached the weathered benches near the visitor area. Her coffee had gone lukewarm, but she didn't drink it. She just sat, shoulders square, jaw tight, eyes tracking the firing line like a satellite dish. At 38, she still moved like a soldier, not because she wanted to, because her body didn't know how to forget. The weekend sun climbed higher, baking the California desert until heat shimmered above the targets. Haley didn't squint, she read the air instead, scanning the mirage patterns like a language only she understood. A staff sergeant spotted her before long. "Ma'am," his voice carried from the firing line, clipped but polite, "visitor seating is behind the yellow rope. This is a restricted area." Haley blinked, as if waking from a trance, and touched her wrist through the sleeve of her windbreaker, the spot where blue ink rested against her skin. Then she nodded once, no argument, and stepped back behind the rope. But she didn't leave. The range stretched across 30 acres, sun-baked dirt, steel targets, and weathered concrete barriers that had soaked up decades of gunpowder and echoes. Oceanside was one of those places where time never really moved forward. It just layered itself, year after year, until the air itself felt heavy with repetition. She sat on the bench again, still as stone, blending in with the tourists and weekend photographers who thought the military was just another kind of air show. But there was nothing casual about her attention. She saw the wind shift before anyone else, saw the instructors setting up their gear, and noticed which ones were too confident, which ones checked their equipment twice, which ones faked a smile for the audience while their hands betrayed nerves. She saw the little things, the way a young spotter's elbow tucked too tight, the way one of the rifles was canted slightly off-center, the way the dust devils skittered across the range and warned of trouble to come. Her fingers twitched. It was an old reflex, a muscle memory burned in deep. Her hands wanted a notebook, a spotting scope, a radio. They wanted to work again. She forced them still. She wasn't here to work. She was here to remember. Staff Sergeant Miller noticed her again later. This time he approached, careful, respectful, as though he sensed something about her that set her apart from the other spectators. "Ma'am," he said, taking a seat at the far end of the bench. He didn't crowd her, didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Sometimes these demonstrations get pretty loud. We've got a protected viewing area if you'd prefer." Haley shook her head. "This is fine, thank you." "You military?" he asked, a casual question without weight, the kind he probably asked half the people who visited this range. Her answer was quiet, was. It was a word that shut doors. Miller nodded. He didn't pry. He'd been around long enough to recognize the silence of people who had seen things that weren't meant for open conversation. "Well," he said after a pause, "you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. Today's focus is long-range precision. Might be worth watching if you're into that sort of thing. Into that sort of thing. She almost smiled. The demonstration began. The instructors lined up, mostly young, fresh out of sniper school, their uniforms still stiff, their boots barely broken in. Corporal Jenkins led the group, speaking to the crowd with the easy drawl of an Alabama native. He was competent, charismatic, maybe even a little too sure of himself. The spotter, Private Martinez, was another story. Haley recognized that look, intensity sharp enough to cut steel, the look of someone who wanted so badly to get it right that they'd forget to breathe while trying. The crowd loved it at first. The crack of rifles, the clang of bullets on steel, the professional explanations, a safe little taste of military precision. And then the wind changed. It started small, a whisper from the southeast, kicking up just enough dust to make the mirage dance. Haley saw it before the first shot went wide and her chest tightened. The misses started stacking up. Jenkins tried to explain it away for the civilians: environmental factors, wind gusts. This is why we train. But even his confidence began to fray as the shots kept missing, as the crowd started to shift uncomfortably on the benches. Private Martinez squinted through her spotting scope, muttering numbers under her breath, frustration bleeding through every syllable. Haley's fingers twitched again. Southeast gusting, 15 knots. Thermal pockets rising every 30 seconds. The kind of conditions that could humiliate even seasoned shooters if they didn't know how to read them. She didn't mean to get involved. But when Martinez finally missed a third shot in a row and the silence from the crowd grew heavy, Haley felt her body moving before her mind gave permission. She was already calculating, already tracing the air, already back on Overwatch. What made her stand up? Maybe it was the way Private Martinez's jaw locked after the third miss. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, that flash of frustration Haley had seen in younger teammates before they either broke down or broke through. Martinez glanced over her shoulder, scanning the crowd, and her eyes landed on Haley. She hesitated. Then, to Haley's quiet shock, she walked away from the firing line and came toward the bench. "Ma'am," she said, her voice soft, controlled, but carrying an edge of desperation. "You've been watching. You seem like you know what's happening out there." Haley said nothing at first. Martinez swallowed, clearly nervous, clearly breaking some protocol by talking to a civilian during a live-fire demonstration. Would you mind showing me what you're seeing? I can't get the wind right. She stopped herself before saying what was written all over her face. It's making me look like I don't belong here. Haley's first instinct was to refuse, not out of cruelty, out of survival. For 15 years she had stayed in her lane, stayed invisible, stayed out of anything that might pull her back into the orbit she had once lived in. But she looked at Martinez again, the flushed cheeks, the notebook clutched too tight, the stubborn set of her shoulders, and something in her chest cracked. She pointed toward the range. "See the shimmer?" Martinez blinked. "What?" "3/4 to the target. Not uniform. There's a separation line, cooler air meeting the thermal pocket. Your bullets are hitting that boundary and getting pushed." Martinez stared, following the invisible trail Haley had traced with a single finger. "So I should compensate." "Both ways," Haley said, "for wind and vertical displacement, but you can't just hold for it once and forget it. It's shifting every 30 to 40 seconds. Wait for the air to settle, then shoot." Martinez nodded, scribbling notes furiously, then looked up. You've clearly done this before. Long-range shooting." Haley's mouth felt dry. "Different conditions," she said finally. "Same math." Before Martinez could press further, Corporal Jenkins walked over. He wasn't hostile, just cautious, the way professionals are when something unexpected happens on their range. "Ma'am," he said, polite but firm, I appreciate civilian interest, but we have safety protocols during demonstrations. She's helping me understand the thermal effects, Martinez said quickly. I think I know what's been throwing off our shots. Jenkins frowned slightly, but didn't interrupt. Haley just nodded once, stepped back, and let the young soldier work. Martinez returned to her spotting scope, called out the new correction to the shooter, and the next shot rang out with a sound that was almost musical. That sharp, perfect metallic ping of steel struck dead center. The crowd murmured with appreciation. A few even clapped. Martinez grinned, a sudden, almost disbelieving smile breaking across her face. But Jenkins was no longer watching the target. He was watching Haley. And that was when it happened, a simple, almost meaningless gesture. Haley reached out to point at another section of the range, and the sleeve of her windbreaker slid back just far enough for him to see it, the ink. Not a decorative swirl, not a trendy design. 3 sharp geometric lines faded to a muted blue that only came from years under the sun and salt water. Jenkins's eyes narrowed. He didn't say anything right away, but something in his posture shifted, respectful, suddenly alert, like a man who just realized the stranger in front of him wasn't a stranger at all. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what kind of experience do you have with precision shooting?" Haley's answer was so soft, it was almost lost under the wind. "Some." It should have ended there, but now there was a hum in the air, a quiet tension that even the civilians seemed to notice. Before Jenkins could ask anything else, a voice cut through the range. "Jenkins Martinez." Staff Sergeant Miller, walking briskly from the command tent, his expression sharper than before. "We've got visitors," he said, but his eyes weren't on Jenkins. They were locked on Haley. And this time, when her sleeve shifted again, there was no mistaking what he saw. Not just the faded lines. The trident. Faded, yes, but unmistakable. The kind of ink no one got unless they'd earned it. For a moment, Miller just stared. The desert seemed to go quiet, even the flags hanging limp for a single breath of stillness. Then, in a voice that carried just enough weight to make nearby instructors glance over, he asked a question most of the civilians didn't even understand. "Glass." Haley held his gaze, unflinching. "298. It was the only answer she gave. Miller's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once, slow, almost reverent, and said nothing else. But from that moment forward, the tone of the afternoon changed. The demonstration wrapped up with improved accuracy, Martinez landing near-perfect shots now that the wind had been decoded for her. The crowd left satisfied, but Miller didn't leave Haley's bench. And when the last of the civilians began packing up their picnic chairs, 3 dark sedans rolled up to the range gate, government plates catching the afternoon light. Haley didn't move. She just sat there, eyes fixed on the memorial wall in the distance, waiting for whoever had just arrived. Waiting for the next question. Why did 3 sedans make the entire range go still? It wasn't unusual for visitors to come through, families, veterans, tourists. But these weren't minivans with picnic baskets. These were government vehicles, dark and deliberate, the kind that never drove anywhere by accident. Haley didn't flinch when the doors opened. 3 officers stepped out, their uniforms precise, their movements measured. They weren't here for a casual tour. They were here with purpose. Colonel Sarah Chen led the group, her presence quiet but undeniable. At 51, she carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be spoken. 2 others flanked her, Major Rodriguez and Captain Williams, both carrying folders under one arm, their eyes scanning the range before settling on Staff Sergeant Miller. Miller straightened instinctively. "Ma'am," he greeted Chen, his tone shifting from range casual to parade ground formal. "Sergeant," Chen said, nodding once. "We received word that you might have identified someone of particular interest to our training initiatives." Her words were calm, professional, but they made Jenkins glance toward Haley and then back to Miller. Miller didn't speak right away. He just gestured subtle toward the bench. "Civilian visitor claims class 298, he said finally, his voice carrying just enough weight to turn a few heads. "Technical knowledge suggests credentials are legitimate. She assisted one of our spotters in resolving thermal reading issues this afternoon." For a brief moment, silence fell over the group. Colonel Chen's eyes shifted toward the bench, toward Haley. She didn't look away. She'd faced worse stares before, in briefing rooms, in debriefings, in nights when a single spotlight in a tent was the only thing keeping her awake. She learned to hold a steady gaze even when every cell in her body wanted to disappear. Now she simply turned back to the memorial wall, as if the names there could shield her from the past stepping toward her. Captain Williams was the first to approach. His steps were careful, deliberate, the way someone walks when they don't want to spook a wild animal. "Ma'am," he said gently, not sitting until he was sure she wouldn't send him away. "I'm Captain Williams, Special Operations Training Division. Staff Sergeant Miller mentioned your assistance today." Haley didn't look at him. "I helped a soldier understand thermal effects, that's all." Williams nodded. "Sometimes that's exactly what's needed." He lowered himself onto the bench, leaving space between them, enough to show respect, not intrusion. "We're working on updated training protocols for environmental conditions. Real-world application seems to be lacking." His words carried an unspoken question. Haley heard it. She'd heard that tone before, the tone that asked if she'd be willing to step back in, even just a little, to share what she knew. But she also heard the other question underneath it. "Are you still one of us?" She finally turned, met his eyes. "Training protocols change, conditions don't." "True," Williams said, "but institutional knowledge sometimes has gaps, especially from missions that no one writes about." Haley's throat tightened. He knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the whole story, but enough to know she wasn't just some tourist with a good eye for wind. Major Rodriguez joined them now, standing rather than sitting. "We're especially interested in stress environment adaptation, how trained individuals maintain precision when support systems fail." Haley looked at him sharply. "Support systems fail." He said it so casually, like a line in a training manual, but to her it was a memory with teeth. She could still see the smoke rising from the valley, still hear the comms going dead, still taste the metallic panic in her mouth when she realized she was the last one left breathing. She inhaled slowly. Support systems fail. Good training prepares for that reality. "Exactly," Rodriguez said. But Haley wasn't sure she wanted to be part of that preparation anymore. Colonel Chen approached last. She didn't speak until she was standing close enough that Haley could see the fine lines around her eyes, the kind of lines you only get from years of sun and hard decisions. "Miss Brooks," she said softly, "I believe we have mutual acquaintances." Haley gave the smallest of bitter smiles. "We used to." Chen nodded, accepting the weight behind those words. "Rodriguez and Williams have been developing training scenarios based on after-action reports from deployments that officially didn't occur." It was the closest anyone had come to saying it outright. That they knew about Team 7. That they knew about the mission that had taken 5 names from that wall and left one person behind. 15 years of silence pressed in around her. "You've read the reports?" Haley asked. Chen's expression didn't change. "We have, but reports only tell part of the story. The techniques that kept you alive that day, the ones you used before support arrived, aren't in any manual we teach from." Martinez had been standing a respectful distance away, but now she stepped closer, unable to hold back. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "what you taught me worked better than anything I learned in sniper school. If you could teach us more." The words hung there, fragile but full of hope. Haley looked from Martinez to Jenkins, to Miller, to the colonel. There was no pressure in their faces, no threat, no demand. Just respect. Respect she hadn't expected to find here. She stood slowly, brushing dust off her jeans, then faced them all. If I agree, this doesn't leave this range. No media, no publicity, no names. Of course, Chen said immediately. Strictly internal, contractor status. You set your own parameters. Haley glanced back at the memorial wall one more time. For 15 years, she had carried those names like stones in her chest. Maybe it was time they became something else. I'll think about it, she said. Chen nodded. Take whatever time you need. If you decide you're interested, we'll talk again. When the sedans finally drove away, the range seemed quieter than before. Haley sat back on the bench, staring at the wall until the light changed and the shadows grew long. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't just remembering. She was deciding. Why couldn't she stop thinking about their faces? Days passed. She tried to leave it at the range, tried to let it stay there in the desert where it belonged. But at night, when the house was quiet and the ocean wind rattled the blinds, she kept seeing Martinez, young, frustrated, hopeful, standing on that range with her notebook clutched like a lifeline. She saw Colonel Chen's calm eyes, Rodriguez's questions, Williams's quiet patience. She heard Miller's voice when he asked that single word that unlocked 15 years of silence. Glass. 298. It had taken less than a second to answer him. But the answer had never really stopped echoing. Haley found herself walking along the beach at dawn, the salt air stinging her face, her boots sinking into wet sand. It was the only place she could think clearly. 15 years was a long time to stay quiet. But some memories didn't soften with time. She still saw it, the valley, the smoke, the moment when everything went wrong. The flashback came suddenly, like it always did, not as a memory she chose, but as one that broke through her defenses. Dust choking the sky, the sound of gunfire bouncing off rocks, her radio crackling then going silent. Team 7, this is Overwatch, say status, she had whispered back then, her voice low but steady. No answer. Not from Rodriguez, not from Chen, not from Kowalski, who always answered first, even when he was busy patching someone up. One by one, the calls had gone unanswered until only her own breathing filled the comms. She had stayed in position for 36 minutes after the last gunshot. 36 minutes that stretched into an eternity, scanning, waiting, refusing to believe they were all gone. And then finally, the rescue team had arrived. Too late. She had been extracted, silent and stone-faced, her spotting scope still warm in her hands. She had debriefed under fluorescent lights. She had written the reports. She had been cleared of fault. But none of that had ever felt like absolution. And now here they were again. Not the men and women she had lost, those names were still etched in granite. But the next generation, people who might make it home if someone gave them the right tools. And she was sitting on knowledge she hadn't shared. Knowledge that had cost 5 lives to earn. The next morning she opened the envelope Colonel Chen had left her. A simple contact number, nothing else. She stared at it for a long time before dialing. Special Operations Training Division, a professional voice answered. This is Haley Brooks, she said quietly. Tell Colonel Chen I'm ready to talk. 2 weeks later, she stood outside a classroom at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. The smell hit her first, oil, gunpowder, dry marker ink on whiteboards. Familiar smells, old ghosts. Her heart hammered as she stepped inside. There were 12 students waiting. Advanced marksmanship trainees, their notebooks open, their faces alert. Private Martinez sat near the front, her expression brightening the moment she saw Haley. Haley nodded once and almost smiled, then set her notes down. She didn't start with credentials. She didn't start with rank. She started with air. Thermal effects aren't constant, she said, her voice steady, measured. They shift with sun angle, ground composition, and atmospheric pressure. Your scope can tell you distance. But your eyes, she paused, letting the silence work. Your eyes have to read the air itself. The room went still. Every head tilted forward, every pen poised. Haley paced slowly, letting her fingers trace invisible lines in the air. Some of you will rely on equipment to tell you what the wind is doing, and most of the time that's fine. But there will come a day, maybe next month, maybe 5 years from now, when the gear fails, or the batteries die, or the situation doesn't give you time to check, and you'll have to trust yourself. A ripple went through the room. She saw them get it. Not the whole weight of it, not yet. That would take time. But the idea that this mattered, that what she was teaching wasn't just theory. It was survival. Hours passed before she even realized it. The questions came fast, detailed, technical, hungry. Martinez asked about mirage patterns over water. Another student asked how to read wind at night when you couldn't rely on dust movement. Haley answered everything, not because she wanted to prove anything, but because she could. Because no one had been there to answer those questions for her, 15 years ago, before the valley. When the session ended, Staff Sergeant Miller stepped into the room. He didn't say much, just nodded once, a look of quiet respect passing between them. In the parking lot afterward, Martinez jogged to catch up with her. "Ma'am," she said breathlessly, "that was incredible. The way you explained the shimmer, I never even thought to look for the separation line like that." Haley felt something in her chest shift. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was lighter. Like maybe this was what she'd been carrying all these years, waiting to hand it off. As she drove home that night, she passed the memorial wall again. She stopped, got out, and walked up to it in the cool evening air. For the first time in 15 years, she traced the names and didn't just feel failure. She felt purpose. Maybe this was what carrying them forward was supposed to look like. Not silence. Not hiding. But teaching. Why did her chest tighten the first time they handed her a rifle again? It wasn't part of the plan. She hadn't come back to shoot just to teach. The contract was clear. Consultant, environmental conditions, no demonstrations unless she volunteered, and she hadn't planned to volunteer. But today's class was different. It was a live scenario day, students working through complex firing problems under timed stress, multiple targets, shifting winds, no external guidance. A test of instinct as much as skill. Haley stood on the observation platform with Staff Sergeant Miller, arms crossed, watching Martinez run her squad through the exercise. "They're good," Miller said quietly, nodding toward the line. "They're fast," Haley corrected. "Good will come later if they live that long." Miller didn't take offense. He knew what she meant. The wind shifted again, a nasty, unpredictable crosswind that would throw shots off if they didn't adjust. Martinez saw it, hesitated, started to call a correction, but it was too late. The shot went wide, hitting low right. Again, Martinez barked. The next shooter compensated but overcorrected. Another miss. Haley felt her hands twitch. "You want to call it?" Miller asked. She hesitated. And then she nodded once, slow, and stepped down from the platform. The students glanced over as she walked toward them. Her presence was quiet, but every eye tracked her as if some instinct told them to pay attention. She didn't speak until she was standing next to the prone shooter. "Your wind hold is wrong," she said simply. The shooter stiffened, embarrassed. "Look at the dust near the left berm," Haley said, crouching low, pointing with a single gloved hand. "See how it's not just blowing sideways, it's curling. That means you've got an updraft combining with crosswind. Hold 1/2 mil left, quarter high. Wait for the lull." The student fired exactly when she said. The round rang true, dead center. A murmur of relief went through the line. But Haley wasn't done. "Get up," she told the shooter. Then, without explanation, she slid into the prone position herself. The rifle was heavier than she remembered. Not the exact model she'd used in-country, but close enough that her body remembered where every control was without thinking. Her cheek welded to the stock. The world narrowed. The range disappeared. And for one sickening moment, she wasn't in California anymore. She was back in the valley. Dust, heat, the smell of cordite. The last words she'd heard over comms, "We're pinned, ha," before the channel went dead. Her finger froze on the trigger. "Ma'am," Martinez's voice was cautious. Haley's breath came back in a rush. She blinked, refocused on the steel plate downrange. The shot broke clean. Perfect hit. The students cheered quietly, but Haley didn't hear them. She rolled out of position, standing quickly, brushing sand off her jeans as if to shake off the memory itself. Miller stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said too quickly. He didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Later in the empty classroom, she sat with her head in her hands, elbows on the table. It wasn't just the shot. It was what came after, the rush, the focus, the part of her that had missed that feeling and hated that it had missed it. When the door opened, she expected Miller. It was Martinez. The young sergeant hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside. "Ma'am, that shot was incredible. The way you read the wind." Haley held up a hand, stopping her. "It wasn't just a shot, Martinez." Martinez frowned slightly, waiting. Haley stared at the floor. 15 years ago, I took a shot like that. Different rifle, different country. I hit what I was aiming at, and it didn't matter. My team was already gone." Martinez didn't move. "I told myself I was done," Haley continued. "Done with rifles, done with ranges, done with teaching people how to do something that would keep them alive when it hadn't kept the people I cared about alive." She finally looked up. "But today I watched you miss. And I realized if I stayed quiet, if I just stood there and let you keep guessing, maybe one day you'd miss when it mattered." Martinez's throat worked, her expression shifting from admiration to something deeper, respect. "You didn't let us miss today," she said softly. Haley almost smiled, almost. "Don't make me regret it," she said. The next day, she showed up before sunrise. When the students arrived, she was already at the board, diagramming thermal layers, writing numbers, drilling them harder than she had before. No one complained. When they moved outside, she stayed on the range the whole time, moving between shooters, making quiet corrections, sometimes taking their scopes to show them exactly what she saw. The results were immediate. Hits tightened, confidence grew. Miller watched from the observation platform, saying nothing, just nodding once when Haley glanced up at him. Later in the office, he said, "You're doing more than consulting now." Haley leaned against the doorframe. "I know." "You good with that?" She thought about it. About the weight she'd carried for 15 years. About the way it felt to hand just a little of that weight to Martinez yesterday, and watch her stand taller under it. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I am." Why was she holding her breath for their first shot? The sun had barely risen over the mock training village, a grid of concrete buildings designed to simulate an urban combat environment. The air smelled of dust and burnt oil, the way all training grounds eventually did. Haley stood with her arms crossed, trying to look calm, but her heart was beating harder than she wanted to admit. This wasn't a classroom anymore. This was the test. For 3 weeks she had drilled Martinez's team, wind calls, thermal effects, timing windows, shooting between gusts. They had practiced until their fingers bled from adjusting turrets, until their eyes could pick out mirage layers in their sleep. But drills were one thing. This was live scenario work, no guidance, no corrections from her. The exercise would run full spectrum, moving targets, shifting conditions, simulated stressors, everything that could go wrong layered on top of everything that already had. Miller stood next to her on the observation deck, binoculars raised. "You're twitching," he said quietly. "I'm not twitching," she muttered. He didn't argue. Down below, Martinez and her partner crawled into position on the rooftop of Building 12. The wind had started shifting just like Haley predicted, strong cross gusts that would force them to hold, wait, shoot, only during the quiet windows. "Range control, you are green," a voice crackled over the radio. The exercise began. Targets popped up across the village, some standing still, some moving fast between alleyways. The first shot cracked through the still morning air. Direct hit. Haley exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The second target appeared, farther this time, half hidden behind a wall, the wind gusting just enough to push a round off if they didn't read it right. Martinez waited. Haley could see her through the spotting scope, her breathing steady, timing the mirage, waiting for the air to settle. The shot rang out. Another perfect hit. Haley didn't smile, not yet, but something in her chest eased. One by one, the team worked through the exercise. They hit targets other teams missed. They timed shots perfectly, letting the wind dictate their tempo rather than fighting it. And then came the final target, the stress shot. It was positioned at maximum range, with wind at its worst and a 30-second time limit. Haley knew most shooters missed this one. Martinez didn't. She made her call, adjusted her hold, fired in the last 2 seconds of the window, and the distant clang of steel echoed across the training ground. Miller let out a low whistle. "That's a clean sweep." Haley finally let herself smile, just a little. When the exercise ended, Martinez jogged over, face flushed, beaming like a kid who had just hit her first bulls. "Ma'am," she said breathlessly, "that was the first time I didn't feel like I was guessing. I knew exactly what the wind was doing. It was like I could see the shot before I took it." Haley nodded, her voice quiet but steady. "That's how it's supposed to feel." Martinez tilted her head. "Did it ever feel like that for you, back then?" Haley hesitated. "Yes," she said finally, "sometimes, and those were the days that kept us alive." The students gathered around as range control announced their scores, highest of the class. It wasn't just a good day. It was a statement. Haley stayed quiet while the team celebrated, but inside, something was shifting. For the first time in years, she didn't just feel like she was remembering the dead. She felt like she was protecting the living. Later, back in the instructor hut, Miller poured 2 coffees and slid one across the table. "You're different today," he said. "Different how?" "You're standing a little taller, like you just won something." Haley stared at the steaming coffee for a moment before answering. "Maybe I did." Miller waited. "When I left," she said slowly, "I thought I was done, thought I could just disappear and let it all stay buried. But seeing them out there," she gestured toward the range, "knowing they might walk into something like what we walked into and not make it home, that's worse than anything I went through in that valley." Miller nodded quiet. Haley took a sip of the coffee, then looked him dead in the eye. "We're not just training them to hit steel, Miller. We're training them to come back breathing." He raised his cup. "Then I'd say we had a good morning." That night, Haley went to the memorial wall again. For 15 years, she had stood there in silence, tracing 5 names with guilt. But tonight was different. She still traced the names, still whispered them under her breath. Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, Thompson, Kowalski. But the air felt lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, their deaths weren't just endings. They were lessons being passed forward, through her, into the hands of soldiers who would carry them into the future. She stayed until the sun went down, the last light glinting off the black granite like a salute. Why was the radio silent this long? It was supposed to be a routine field evolution. 2 days in the high desert, practicing navigation, overwatch rotations, and long-range observation drills under harsh conditions. Nothing about it should have felt this familiar. But as Haley stood near the command tent, listening to the distant crackle of static, she felt the same cold weight she had felt 15 years ago, kneeling in a valley with her scope pressed to her eye, waiting for voices that never came back. "Range control to observation post 2, the radio repeated. No answer. Miller frowned, toggled the mic again. "Post 2, status check." Silence. Then faintly, a burst of comms chatter, garbled, panicked. Haley's blood went cold. "What's their last location?" she asked sharply. Miller didn't hesitate. He pointed toward the ridgeline on the far side of the training area. Haley was already moving before he finished. The desert air bit at her face as she climbed the slope, boots digging into loose rock, heart hammering harder with every step. She hadn't moved like this in years, but her body remembered exactly how. By the time she reached the overwatch position, she found 3 students hunkered low behind rocks, Martinez among them, her rifle abandoned beside her as she waved frantically toward Haley. "We've got a live fire hazard," Martinez said, breathless. "One of the tracer rounds started a brush fire. It's cutting off our exfil route." Haley scanned the scene in a heartbeat. Flames had already eaten through dry grass, advancing toward the canyon floor where the rest of the unit was staged. The wind, the same wind they'd been training against all week, was driving the fire faster, pushing smoke across the valley and blinding visibility. If they didn't move now, the canyon would trap them. "Pack your gear," Haley said instantly. Her voice was calm, crisp. "We're pulling out on the north route." "There is no north route," one of the students protested. "The maps." "Forget the maps," Haley snapped, pointing toward the ridgeline. "See the saddle cut, the wind's pushing smoke west. We move north now, we'll get clear air in 3 minutes. But you wait," she jerked her chin toward the fire. "That eats this whole ridge and takes you with it." No one argued after that. They moved fast, packs on, weapons slung, Haley leading them along the narrow, rocky path. She could feel the heat building behind them, smell the smoke closing in, but she kept her pace steady. Panic got people killed faster than fire did. Halfway across the ridge, Martinez stumbled, coughing through the smoke. Haley grabbed her arm, hauled her back to her feet. "You read the wind," Haley ordered. Martinez blinked at her through watering eyes. "What?" "Read the wind." It wasn't a request. Martinez dropped to a knee, squinting past the smoke, watching the angle of the flames, the way ash and sparks lifted. She adjusted her path 20 degrees to the left. "This way," she called, her voice steadier now. The others followed. When they cleared the saddle, they emerged into open air, smoke thinning, sky widening, the fire now below them, trapped in the canyon they had just escaped. Haley allowed herself one slow breath before turning back to count heads. All present, all breathing. By the time range safety vehicles reached them, the fire crew was already moving in to contain the burn. Haley didn't wait for the debrief. She just walked until she found a flat rock overlooking the valley, sat down, and stared at the smoke curling into the sky. She had sworn she would never relive that day, never stand in that waiting silence again, never feel that fear crawl up her spine. And yet here she was, heart still pounding, hands still steady, watching a team survive because this time, someone had been there to tell them where to go. Footsteps approached. Martinez sat down beside her, quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Ma'am, if you hadn't been there." Haley shook her head. "You made the call. I just reminded you what you already knew." Martinez smiled faintly through her soot-streaked face. I wouldn't have known it without you. Haley didn't answer right away. She just watched the wind carry the smoke higher, away from the ridge, and thought about 5 names carved in black granite. 15 years ago, she had been the only survivor. Today, 12 names had walked off that ridge alive. For the first time, she felt the balance shift, just slightly away from loss and toward something else. Something like redemption. Why did the wall look different this time? It hadn't changed. The same names were carved in the same black granite, catching the late afternoon light just like always. The same breeze came off the ocean, cool and sharp, carrying salt into her lungs. But Haley was standing differently. Not like a penitent, not like someone bracing for impact. She stood tall, shoulders square, hands loose at her sides. It had been 6 months since the fire on the ridgeline. 6 months since Martinez and her team had walked away breathing because someone taught them how to read the wind. 6 months of training cycles, classrooms, late-night range work under floodlights, and endless questions that no manual could have answered. And 6 months of finding a rhythm she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She had thought returning would feel like penance. Instead, it felt like purpose. The program had grown faster than anyone expected. Word had spread quietly, not through press releases or recruitment flyers, but through operators coming back from deployment saying the training worked, saying it saved time, saved shots, saved lives. Colonel Chen visited last week with an update. 3 separate units reported 0 casualties in environments where failure was almost expected. Your environmental modules were the difference, Chen had said. They're calling it the Brooks curriculum now. Haley hadn't known what to say to that. She didn't teach for credit, didn't want her name in a syllabus. But when she saw Martinez in the hallway grinning like she'd just been handed the keys to the kingdom, Haley felt a quiet pride settle where guilt used to live. Martinez was a sergeant now, leading her own blocks of instruction. Her voice was calm and sharp on the range, her students listening as though the air itself might shift when she spoke. She had taken what Haley taught and made it her own, exactly the way knowledge was supposed to pass forward. And Haley found that she liked it. She liked watching them grow better than she had been at their age. She liked watching their confidence solidify, watching them solve problems she used to wrestle with alone. She liked knowing they would step into the same dust and win she once did, but with better tools than she had. The memorial wall was quiet today, just her and the names. She traced them one by one, Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, Thompson, Kowalski, but her fingers didn't linger as long as they used to. Because she had stopped coming here just to remember. Now she came to report. Your students are good, she said quietly, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. Better than we were. They see things faster, make their calls cleaner. They know when to wait and when to act. You'd like them. A memory rose unbidden, Kowalski cracking a joke in the middle of a firefight, Rodriguez rolling his eyes, Thompson cursing under his breath as he recalculated wind drift on the fly. Haley smiled. They'd probably give you hell at first, she added softly, but they'd earn your respect. She stood back, letting her shadow fall across all 5 names at once. Behind her, footsteps crunched on gravel. Martinez. Ma'am, she said respectfully, but without the stiffness she once had. Tomorrow's the urban rooftop block. You still good to run thermal drills? Haley nodded. 0800, bring your cards. Martinez hesitated. You ever think about taking this full time? Haley looked back at the wall. This is full time. Martinez smiled at that, then left her alone with the names. The light was fading, gold stretching across the black stone, turning it almost bronze. Haley stayed until the sun touched the horizon, then pressed her palm flat against the granite. She had carried these names like stones for 15 years. But today, for the first time, they didn't feel heavy. They felt steady, like anchors holding her in place. When she turned to go, the wind shifted across the range, soft, cool, predictable. And Haley Brooks smiled, because she had learned that some debts are not repaid in silence. They are repaid in action, in the steady patience of teaching, in the hard days when students want to quit and you stay until they don't, in the nights when you hear the echoes of the valley but keep showing up anyway. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the best way to honor the fallen is to make sure no one else's name has to be carved in stone.